Hi everybody, and welcome to another beginner tutorial. In this video we are going to be looking at how to use the landscape to establish the base of our scene, and we're also going to be talking about the materials. I'm going to be talking about PBR, how to use some of the parameters from the Quixel Surfaces, and we're going to be applying this Quixel to the landscape. We're also going to be blocking out what's going to be our main staging area. Now, this is going to be a fairly small world, so I'm only going to focus on what's going to be on the camera. We're not focusing on building a large open environment. We're just focusing on what the public's going to see in the end. If you like these videos and you want to help out the channel, there's a link to the Patreon down below. You can follow me on Twitter. There's the Discord if you have any questions, and let's get started. Okay, here we are within the engine. One of the things I like to do before we start anything is establish scale. And for that, we're going to bring in a mannequin. The mannequin is kind of like that white robot that you see in all of Unreal Engine assets in the marketplace. It's usually for demonstration purposes. Now, I already have it right here, but I'm going to show you how to get it. So you click on the add button that's in your content browser, and you're gonna go into add features or content pack. Over here, you're going to select third person, and you're gonna click on add to project. Once you do that, you should get these folders over here, except the Megascans ones, that's from Quixel. And if you double click on mannequin and character and mesh, you're gonna see that we have a male and a female. This is the skeletal mesh. This is what you wanna use as scale. So I'm just gonna drag this one over here, and I'm gonna rotate him so he's facing me. There you go. So now I have my scale to a regular human size. Now the purpose of this video is to talk a little bit about the landscape tool. The landscape tool is something that we have in Unreal to create huge terrain or exteriors. It doesn't matter the size, to be honest. You can use it to create wide open worlds, and you can use it to create smaller worlds, which is what we're gonna do right now. So if you click on this, the activate landscape editing mode, it's going to take you to the landscape tool. So the landscape tool pretty much is this flat plane that contains a bunch of squares or polygons where you're going to be creating your terrain. Now, before we go here, know that there are various ways that you can create your terrain. The first one and the easiest one is after you created your terrain, you can manually paint over or sculpt your terrain on this. You can do this with the brushes that we have here, or you can do it with some alphas, which will give you some more detail. The other way is by using a height map. So as you can see over here, it says create new or import from file. So I could get a height map from certain terrain programs like World Creator, World Machine, and I can just import them out in here, and I'll have my terrain. The other way to do it is by using real world data. So there are websites that you can go and you can get scan data for a specific part of the world, and it will give you a height map for that, and you'll bring it here in as a height map as if you were using World Creator or any of those programs with import file, and it'll be here. Now, the reason why I am going to be using landscape in this particular tutorial is to use it as a base for my project. So it will block out the floor, the entire floor on my project. We're going to add a material to it, but I will not be doing any sculpting or anything else. We're actually, the background mountains, there are various other ways that we can do it, and we're actually going to bring other things from third-party programs like Blender, where we can make a very nice looking terrain, because we're not caring about the polygons anymore. This used to be a tool that was very cool for games because of the optimization side of it, meaning it allowed you to have a large terrain without impact on your performance. We're not going to be worrying about that so much, so we're going to be bringing our own, but we need to make our floor, we need to make the base of our terrain, so we're going to use this. Now let's go through the parameters. Over here you're going to see that we have the transformation parameters, so location, rotation, and scale. Actually turn that back to 100% just to show you something. Now we have the section size, which means that if I scroll up you're gonna see that I have a giant square and a bunch of tiny squares. So right now that giant square is divided into sections. So 2 by 2, it's 4. So 4 sections per square. Actually, I'm just going to take it to default. This is how the default looks like. And this little tiny squares, these little tiny polygons are the section size. So this is 63 this way by 63 this way on each one of these. Now, this is not super important for this particular series because we're not going to be doing it for this alien world. We may be using it for later on, and I'm going to show you when we need it, how to use it correctly. But just know that if you want to increase the resolution, you can increase the little quads right here, and you can increase the sections. Another way to increase the resolution, if you don't want to make your world any bigger, let me just increase the speed of this. You can just change the scale. So if you need a tiny world, like we're doing right now, you can change the scale to 60%, and you see that these polygons reduced in size, which give you a much better resolution if you need to do some sculpting on your landscape. All right. So after that, all we have to do is hit create, and it will create our landscape for us. So as you can see, we have the sculpting brush, which is something I'm going to show you. But one of the reasons why I don't like to use this so much is because it produces these kind of like blobby results. There are other tools here, but they will never give you those nice terrains that we're going to be making later on in other programs. So I'm just going to undo that, and I'm just going to bring this terrain so it's in line with my character. So I'm going to get out of landscape mode and I'll go back to select mode. I want to select my landscape, and I'm just going to bring it down. So right now is 100, so it's raised by 100 centimeters. By the way, Unreal is made on the metric system, so that's pretty much what I'll be talking about. And we're just going to switch this down to the 1. So remember, the z-axis, the blue one, goes up and down. So I'm just going to change this to 1. Why am I not changing it to 0? Because if I do 0, this is too close to the grid, and sometimes that grid shows up and can be a little bit annoying, like you're seeing right here. So I just type 1, so it's a little bit higher than the grid. Now my character is no longer touching the floor, so I need to fix that as well. Click on him, and there you go. Now he is stepping on the floor. So let's look at some of the parameters that we have right here. This information is giving you what your landscape is about. So your resolution, the components, the amount of subsections, etc. over here. And again, this used to be an optimization tool, so it has a ton of LOD options if you need to use that. Edit layers, which we're going to check whenever we're using water. We're not going to be using water right now. And we have the landscape material. This is where we're going to add the texture or the coat of paint for this particular landscape. All right, so we're gonna be adding that material to this part now. So for that, we're gonna go into content. We're gonna go to Quixel Bridge. And after we signed in, we can start looking for our content. So I'm going to type Icelandic. I'm gonna go for surfaces because again, that's the coat of paint that we want for this base landscape. And we have a ton in here that we can choose. You can choose the one that you prefer. I'm actually going to look for a specific one. It's kind of like a sandy. And the reason why I'm choosing this one is because you're gonna see that when we put it on, it's going to tile. Tile means it's going to repeat. And this one, the repetition is not as bad. So I'm just going to add it. I've already have it downloaded. I'm gonna add it to my project. And also remember to use the highest quality. And as you can see, successfully exported one asset. Now, if we go back into content, you're gonna see that now we have a Megascans folder. So you double click this one, double click on surfaces, and it's going to show you the surface that you have right here. In this case, we have the Icelandic lava sand. The 2 by 2 means this is 2 meters by 2 meters. So that's pretty much the size of your tile. After I add it, you'll see what a tile means. Its original size is 2 meters by 2 meters. Now, as you can see, this looks kind of wet, and we're going to talk about the material side of things in a little bit, but know that this is caused because when you're bringing in right now, at the moment I'm recording this video, I don't know why this map, the ORD map, is coming in black and white. It's supposed to be a colored map in order to display all parts of the physical base material correctly. Before we go into the material, let's fix that. I'm just going to double click here, and as you can see where it says compression, it says alpha no RGB. We actually want it to be RGB, so I'm just going to choose default. And now you see that our Icelandic lava sand, it's no longer wet. It looked pretty wet because of the roughness. So if we go here, you're going to see that we have all kinds of controllers. Let me explain something before we actually get into this. Now, if you've never done 3D, when we talk about physically based rendering or PBR, this means the textures, aka the coat of paint, that resembles a physically correct material. So this is based into a couple of maps. In this case, we have a diffuse or albedo map, which indicates our color. Then we have a normal map, it's kind of like the simulation of detail in the 3D world. It's one of the ways we used to use it in games back before we didn't have nanite. We use a lot of normal maps to simulate detail, and now, even though we have nanite, we can simulate very small detail by using normal maps. So these maps allow the light to react to those details and make our assets look even better. Now these maps, these ORD maps, is where the PBR part is saved. Now, usually for other engines, if you're using Quixel Megascans for something like Maya or 3ds Max or Blender or whatever, usually you get maps with like ambient occlusion, roughness, metalness, which have to do with the PBR. So when it comes to the PBR, your metalness is the map that indicates what's metal and what's not. So it's just a 0 or 1 value. It doesn't have any values in between. The reason for that is because in the real world, something is either metal or it isn't. There's no like almost metal. That wouldn't be physically accurate. The roughness is, as the word says it, it implies what is rough, and whatever has the lowest roughness means it's going to be smoother, so it's going to reflect more light. A mirror or a glass is a lot less rough than your carpet. That's why the mirror or the glass will reflect more light than your carpet will. And the O for occlusion, there's this thing called ambient occlusion that if you look at real world objects, you don't notice it because it's just part of the real world, but there's usually a very, very thin line of darkness in between things where light just doesn't go. It's a very, very small line. You have to start looking for it to see it. But this is a map that allows that detail to be translated into the 3D world, because these are crevices that are so small that sometimes the ray castings within the engine will not pick them up and will not produce those things that will make our results more realistic. Here in Unreal Engine, what Quixel has done is pack these maps into a single file, so they are a lot easier to use. So what they do is part of that map is in the R, part it's in the G, and part it's in the B. So we have red, green, and blue. That's where the maps are saved, and that's why it's important that this is a colored map in order to react correctly. So let's get our material in here first before we talk about the parameters. The way you're gonna do that is you're gonna grab and you're gonna let it go here. That's one way. Another way is you just click on it and just click this little arrow right here, and that will assign it. All right, so after I have assigned it, it's going to compile a little bit. I'm just going to wait for it to compile. So this is the texture for our landscape, and as you can see, there is some repetition in there. I'm going to lower the camera, and if we get closer, you're going to see that this looks really nice. But if we go outside, you're gonna see that there is repetition, and there is a lot of it. This is what I mean by tiling. So as you can see, this thing is tiling really, really hard. And the way we kind of compensate for that is by adding assets to it. So there are plenty of tutorials out there that show you how to mix the landscape in order to kind of help out the tiling. The thing about trying to fix the tiling is you can do it to a certain point, but you always have to get rid of the tiling by adding stuff to the world. So you cannot expect to create a full landscape that will have a material that will not look tiled at all if you don't have any variation to it. So either you have variations of different materials to get rid of that tiling, or you just have assets all around the world, which is what we're gonna do to get rid of that tiling. Now, this tiling it's pretty harsh, so we're gonna fix it by looking at some of the parameters that the Quixel material shows us. So if we go double click in your material, so anything that we change here, you're gonna see that instantly happens. Over here, it may take a little bit of compiling, but it will be pretty quick. So the first thing that we're gonna look at is tiling and offset. So if you click on that little arrow, it will make a drop-down menu. You have to activate it first. So click on it, and we're going to reduce this number so we get less tiling. Now, every time you reduce this number, it will make each tile bigger. That means that if you reduce this texture by a lot, you'll start seeing pixels, and it will not be as accurate, or maybe the rocks that are here will start look ridiculous. Like, let me just show you what I mean. So let's do a very, very small value. There you go. So if you go crazy with this and you say, hey, I don't want to see tiling at this position, you're gonna see that these rocks look ridiculously large. And not only that, but they're losing a lot of fidelity, and there's a lot of pixelation, and this thing just doesn't work for what we're trying to do. And we're trying to use this as a scan. So I'm going to make it to a value that's more acceptable. So again, this looks like nice smaller pebbles, but even as at this distance, it doesn't look as tiled. So we can have the camera at this distance. If we start going up, of course, we're gonna start see it. Actually, my favorite one is 0.25. That's for me the sweet spot. You can tailor that to whatever you want, but that is the tiling that I like to use. So offset, this isn't something that I use a lot because it just moves the texture around. It doesn't do much to better my landscape. So as you can see, if I just move these values, it just moves around, but it doesn't change much. Ambient occlusion strength doesn't do a lot in here. The other value that does affect a lot of our terrain is the albedo tint. So let's say we want this floor to have a very particular color. We'll go here. We'll also have the albedo controls, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if we go into the albedo tint, you're gonna see that now my landscape is blue. If I go here, now my landscape, it's gonna look pinkish. So you can try all kinds of colors in here, and if you want to reset something, you can just do this little arrow right here, and that'll reset the values for you. If it doesn't reset instantly, then just uncheck it and check it again, and it'll go back to normal. Now we have saturation, brightness, contrast. These are other ways that we can affect the color of our material. So if I increase the saturation, you're gonna see that this starts changing and all kinds of colors start appearing. Depending on what you're trying to achieve with your terrain, if you want to enhance the colors a little bit, maybe just a tiny bit of saturation will do. Then there's the brightness. So I'm just going to do ridiculous values just to show you what it does. So if we do like 15, I have a completely overexposed terrain. So I'm just gonna bring that to 1 again. And contrast, when you increase, it increases the contrast. So again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. It will change your material right here. One will make it brighter, one will make it darker. So if we do like 5, you can see that it gets a little bit dark. Now, as you can see, if I use a higher value of contrast, it gets pretty dark. So I'm just gonna turn it back to where it was. I usually don't mess with the albedo controls unless I'm trying to match specifics. So let's say that I bring in a prop that is probably not supposed to be in this kind of terrain, but I want it to match. I'll start playing with these controls until I get the color that I want. So I'm just going to reset everything just to make sure that I have the base material. And if we need to make some changes once we bring in our assets, then we'll do so. Now there's another value in here that you might be interested in, which is the roughness of it. So let's say you want this to look a little bit wetter, a little bit shinier. So you will just reduce the roughness values, meaning you'll make it smoother and it will reflect more light. So let's do 0.1. You can see that pretty much this whole surface, it's like super wet. It's like it just rained, and it's pretty reflective. So that's why it simulates kind of like that wetness effect. So you can tailor that in case you need to make a very specific kind of terrain. The alien world that we're making doesn't have any wetness on the terrain, so we're not going to worry about that. I just wanted to show you that this was here. So after we've established our landscape, then another thing that I want to do is establish my shot. And the way we're going to do that is not by using the viewport look. We're going to bring in a camera. So if you go into place actors, we're going to look for a cinema camera. So if I type camera over here, you're going to see there are several things. There's a cinema camera actor, and there's a camera. You want the cinema camera actor because we're doing stuff for film, and this will give you a ton of options that you can play with that this camera doesn't. So we're gonna bring this one in. You can see it's huge. And this is what we're gonna use to establish our shot. So let me change the speed of my camera. Let me use my subject as the target. I'm gonna bring it back. And there you go. So let's say around here is fine. And now you can see that when we move, the light kind of adjusts. In this game engine, one of the things that it has is something called auto exposure, which will pretty much try to make the exposure to a certain level. When I'm making things, it can be bothersome. So as you can see, this is getting super bright, but if I get closer and the brightness goes away, I'm usually transitioning a lot. So in order to get rid of this problem, we're gonna add a post-processing volume. So I'm just gonna look here in the post-processing volume. By the way, that's very important why I like to have this here, because I just can look for stuff instead of, you know, looking up over here. So I'm just gonna click and drag. And it's this nice square that we have right here. Now this square has all kinds of options, but for the meantime, we're going to go over here. If this drop down is not open, just open the drop down that says lens. We're going to go into exposure. We're going to check these. So metering mode, exposure compensation, the min and max. I'm going to change this to 1. As you can see, nothing has changed. The reason why nothing has changed is because by default, this post-processing volume, it's meant to react whenever you are inside of it. So that was the default reason why it was created. But there's an option here where you can just make it infinite. So you don't have to be inside of it. You can just make it affect the whole world. So I'm just going to click here and boom. That's how we get our exposure to be one and the same, whatever we are. Now you can see that the light is no longer changing and I have something a little bit more correct. So we have our subject, we have our base, and now I need the other things that go on my scene. And one of those things was the giant pillars. And again, I'm just going to show the scene right here just so you can see what I mean. But I did have some giant pillars, and those were my huge visual targets, and I want to bring them here. However, I don't need to bring them right now. I can just use geometry to block where they're going to be, and we can bring them later. So I'm just going to grab this cube, let's put it next to our character. And those pillars were pretty big. All right, so I'm just gonna do 10 times. And let's see, right now, as you can see, it's rescaling uniformly because I have my padlock. Another tip you can do is you can have your padlock, and if you switch to your gizmo right here, I'm just using the letter R to switch to scale. You can still, even though you have the pad on the lock position, you can still scale it in one direction. So I'm just going to scale it this way. And let's review our camera. We're actually pretty close. So let's see. I'm gonna go into my camera. I'm gonna change my focal length to 30. And I'm gonna hold right click. I'm going to navigate backwards until I can see the first pillar. And I think I'm just going to open this in another viewport. And I'm just gonna move my pillar a little bit back. So I click my camera, you can see it here. There you go. So I may want to reduce the size of this, something like 6, so we can have a little bit more of it on scene. Now, let me just add the other one. So if you hold the key of Alt and you drag into one direction, you're pretty much going to copy that object. So that's how I'm creating my second pillar. I'm gonna bring it into view and I'm gonna switch to my camera. And I'm going to throw it all the way back, like this. It's gonna be all the way back here. And this is going to be kind of like the framing of my scene. If I were to go into my cinematic viewport, go back into my camera, and let's test it with the rule of thirds. So probably want this guy over here. So it looks a little bit better. There you go. And he's not gonna be on the scene, so it doesn't matter. He's just for scale. So let me just leave this one right here, and we pretty much have the blocking of our environment. Everything else that was in my environment was some mountains right here that we're gonna make in another video. But like that, I just established my shot. All right, everybody, that is it for this video. In the next video, we're going to start adding more Megascan assets to our scene. We're gonna add the static meshes, and we're going to flesh out our world. So you're not gonna wanna miss that. Make sure you hit that like button and leave me a comment. It really helps out with the engagement. Follow me on Twitter, subscribe to our Discord server, and I'll see you in the next one.